Namaskaram to all. I'm very happy, my friend and Judge of the Madras High Court is present here and is going to talk later, so I'm not going to mention his name. And I see many familiar faces of the Karyakartas whom I have met from ABVP, and I'm happy to share my thoughts with you on the subject that has been given with an audience which is going to be the future of the country. You know, the world has changed tremendously, and we keep on saying the world has changed, but the world has not changed as much as it has changed in the last 6 months. You know, these changes have come not because of any sudden reason. It has come because of accumulated reasons. In fact, Trump is being accused of waging a trade war against the rest of the world. But for those who are familiar with my writings, I have always been saying this trade war was inevitable for America. It's not now. It has been inevitable for America for the last 15 years, even more. Because it requires a helicopter view to understand how this situation has come about. It is a lifestyle problem. It's not an economic problem. In fact, when we are going to talk about Atmanirbharta, I am going to say how importing lifestyle is more dangerous economically than importing goods. Import lifestyle, the goods comes automatically. And lifestyle is sold, lifestyle is marketed, and the lifestyle is bought without price. I'll give you a small example. How lifestyle can protect an economy and how it can also destroy an economy. You know Japanese rice. The Japanese rice is called uruchimai. It's a sticky rice. And you know they eat it with chopsticks. And that rice sticks in the top chip. So this chopsticks and the sticky rice is the culture of Japan. And unless you eat with chopsticks, you are not a Japanese. It's a habit that it is built. You know, I have tried to eat rice with chopsticks. I failed so miserably. But you know, what is the secret behind this? How is culture and lifestyle that saved Japanese agriculture? Japan's rice, I am talking about the figure of April 2025. The Japanese rice costs $30 for a 5 kilo bag. But the Californian rice is just $2.5 per 5 kg. You can understand that 12 to 15 times is the difference. And in 1990s, when America imposed a lot of restrictions on Japan and wanted to sell its rice, and they said you should not only stock our rice, but you should also put a price tag on the Californian rice and the Japanese rice for the Japanese to choose which rice to eat, because the Japanese rice was 13 times costlier than Japanese rice. The Japanese rice was 13 times costlier as compared to Californian rice. In fact, I still remember there was an editorial written on the 31st of March 1994 in Economic Times. Mad buying, that was the title of the editorial. You know, when these bushels rice were kept as Californian rice and the Japanese rice. Queues were standing before the Japanese rice to buy the costly Japanese rice because they felt it may run out of stock. Nobody bought the Californian rice. Still today, that is the position. If the chopstick changes, Japanese agriculture will be destroyed. So they have been trying to see that the Japanese give up the chopsticks. The Japanese teach the young to use the chopsticks, and that becomes the identity of Japan. So why I am saying this as an example is how if lifestyle is important, lifestyle changes, then no amount of tariff is going to save you. I am going to give you an example. Because Swadeshi is a movement which, when we got involved in 1994 fighting against globalization, but they went to interest all over the country, in all education institutions. Because we were perhaps the only counter voice at that time. Nobody would speak against globalization. If you spoke against globalization, you are a Neanderthal economist. That you are taking the country 5,000 years back. In fact, I remember in Administrative Staff College of India in Hyderabad, it's a huge gathering. Nearly 2,000 people were there. The entire elite of Hyderabad city had come and was talking. At that time, of course, I was so very well known as this and that, and a fighter and a crusader. So wherever I went, huge gatherings used to come. So when I was talking how globalization is a disaster, it's going to be a disaster. It will implode. It will collapse. Now it has. But at that time, nobody believed. That was the highway. One army officer, ex-army officer, stood up and said, people like you must be shot dead, Mr. Gurumurthy, because you are taking the country backwards. That was the tsunami against which we were fighting at that time. Because we always get into a fad. What is fashionable? But we don't know what is sustainable. Because sustainability is a rule of nature and fad is fashion. Sustainability and fashion always clash. Now I am going to tell you, on the basis of the discussion I had with the Prime Minister of India when he gave this G20 motto, one world, one earth, one family, one future. So I was discussing with him and I said that it is a very good idea, very good motto, which philosophic Indian mind will understand. But how will the world understand? They will think it is a slogan. Then he asked me what should be done. I said there are ways in which it can be packed with facts. Then I mentioned what I had studied. Of course, it's not that he is unaware of it. But I said we have to link those facts to this motto. And then he told me, you go and talk to the Niti Aayog on the 23rd of October 2023, if I remember right. I spoke to the Niti Aayog. The 3 points which I spoke before the Niti Aayog is very relevant here. And I am going to take it. You know what is the land size of India? Of the total land area of the world? Anyone can lift your hand and tell me? What is the land area of India?
3 to 4%?
Not 3 to 4%. I want to know whether it is 2 or 3 or 4.
3.7?
No, it is 2.4. Our total land area is 2.4. If you take the whole world, the surface area, out of which 27%, maybe 29% is land and 71% is water, sea. Of this 27%, remove forest and things like that. 10.2% is the farmable land, agricultural land, out of which we have 1%. In the total land area of India, which is 2.4% of the global surface area, we have almost 50% of our country is farmland. This is the greatest gift that God has given to us. And we cultivate what in that? America is 3.5 times the size of India. China is 3.5 times the size of India. And we grow mostly 99% or 100%. We grow only cereals. We eat cereals. It's not that we are only vegetarian, we also eat non-vegetarians. The total non-vegetarian, that is, if you look at the per capita consumption of meat in India, it is 3.5%, 5 kg per person per annum. And it was about 5.1 kg. Very surprised, the meat consumption in India is actually coming down. So it is 3.1 kg per head per annum. It's not that I'm against non-vegetarians. It's not against there is any choices not allowed in Indian food. 71% of Indians are non-vegetarians. But there is a difference in the non-vegetarian here and the non-vegetarian in America. Here the non-vegetarian uses the non-vegetarian stuff as sabji. The main course is cereal. This is our lifestyle, this is our culture. If we change it, what will happen? I am going to explain it. Cereals give you 83% of the calorie value and meat gives only 17% of the calorie value for the same amount, for say 1 kg. In the same way, cereals give 63% of the protein value and 37% of the, and meat gives only 37% of the protein value. So we eat on average about 168 to 170 kg of cereals per annum. But in America, they eat 124 kgs of meat per head per annum. And what amount of calorie value we get by 1 kg of cereal? They have to eat 20 kg of meat to get that calorie value. They have to eat 3 times the meat to get the protein value. And I will tell you what is the consequence. If all Indians give up eating or change over to the American way of eating, we will need 6 times the agricultural land that India has. India has to be 2.5 times larger in size. Has anyone told you this? Has any university told you this? If you want to look at it, you go to a website called ourworldindata.com. You get all this. This is a website which is maintained by FAO and many American institutions. These are irrefutable facts. And every kg of meat gives 10 to 100 times CO2 gas emission. The greatest contribution that our lifestyle is making is not to poison the world. This lifestyle can be changed. If all Indians can shift to a fashionable burger and things like that, this lifestyle can change. But is it the way we are looking at our lifestyle? Atmanirbharta is gone out of our lifestyle. Any amount of American exports of rice into Japan cannot change because Japanese use the chopsticks. If we lose the proportion between meat and cereal, nobody can save India. Whatever tariff you put. So we have to understand much more deeply The idea of Atmanirbharta. Atmanirbharta is not a matter of economics, it is a matter of lifestyle out of which economics arises, founded, is sustained. But that is not the way we teach economics. This is not the way we teach environment. You know, before the Paris climate meet in 2015, there was a huge effort by people who were interested in environment. They held a very large meeting, there were protests, saying what? There must be at least one meat-free day in a week. Not because they wanted a different lifestyle, they wanted to reduce the CO2 gas emission. That was not allowed by the meat lobby. Even today in COP26, it is only the supply side of environment that is being taken care of. That this is how you must produce green energy, you should do this, you know what. What you are eating is producing poison. India should get carbon credit for this. But your IAS officers, your media, your economists, your political system cannot go and tell COP26 gentlemen, we contribute to environment by our lifestyle, our habit, our food. But you are poisoning the environment by your food, by your lifestyle. You know, 800 million tons of food grains is fed to the animals. Directly, if you take these 800 million tons of food grains, how many calories it will give? Those calories are wasted to make the animals fat, and you cut the animals and eat to get 1/20th of the calorie value which you are feeding to the cattle there. Is on the one side. You know, what is the impact of it? When we say one earth, one family, it is not for you and me only. It is for every living being. That's why we are Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means it's not man and woman living together. Vasudha means earth. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means it is a place where everything that is born in this earth can live. And I am giving you the secret of how our food habit enables this possible. You know what is the percentage of bovine population of India as compared to the world's bovine population? Can anyone stand up and say this? You will say our human population is 18% of the world. Gentlemen, please listen, otherwise I will walk out. You have called me to listen to me. I don't have time to waste. Please listen. I have come here to share some thoughts. I have not sought an audience to speak. You have sought a speaker to listen. And I have come to talk very seriously. I have not come here to joke. So, 30% of the world's bovine population is in India. 42% of the world's cattle population is in India. 8% of the world's bioresources is in India. 18% human beings, 30% bovine population, 42% animal population, 8% bioresources on 2.4% of the global land area. It's an ecological wonder. Environmental, what you can call as something unimaginable. This is happening only because we are eating cereals. And if you are not eating cereals, we have to feed the cereals to grow the cow and eat the cow as the American model. Then you will need, I said, 6 times the agricultural land that you have today is what will enable you to eat the way in which the Americans eat. So the Supreme Court will declare everybody has the right to eat whatever they want to eat. Implement it. There will be no India. There will be no world. If all Indians eat the amount of meat that the Americans eat, there will be no environment. It's all. Do we know that? we are educated? Is it the public discourse? Is this what the media says? Is it what the IIT is saying? No. Because our knowledge is borrowed. We import knowledge. We don't generate knowledge. With the result, we remain totally illiterate because English language keeps us illiterate. You have to escape illiteracy by thinking Indian to find meaning in your English language. This is the first point I want to make. The second point is, in America in 1960, there were 3 persons living in a household. Today it is 2.5. In fact, in America, obviously the family system is collapsed. 28% of the couple with children are only living in families. 49% of the families are headed by single parent families. Father and the mother do not live together, or there is no father at all. In 1998, an American wrote a book, A Fatherless America is Emerging. The title itself is Fatherless America. And with results, the number of persons living in a household has come down from 3 in 1960 to 2.5 now. This 0.5% reduction per household meant constructing 35 million more houses, and the investment was $8.5 trillion. Now completed. We have 4.5 persons living in a household. Our parents live with us, sometimes our grandparents live with us, sometimes even people who are dependent on us, they live with us, aunt or something. I have lived in such a family. So Aminathan, who is sitting here, knows he is a good friend of mine, that my family strength once considered 35. We share our space, we share our money, we share our happiness, we share our sorrow. That is why in that family there are 5 chartered accountants, 7 engineers. Because we collectively work to build the family and its wealth. It demands that you give. That is why Mahabharata said, Yajate ekam kuvasyate, gramarte kulam tyajet, gramam janapadasyate, atmarte prithvim tyajet. That you share with your family. The family shares with the village, and the village shares with the state. And that is how it is a bottom upward society and not top down society. And I will go into what is bottom upwards and top down in a manner in which the world is now looking at, the world is unaware and we do not know. So, in India we have 4.5 persons per household. And if that number comes down to 2.5, let us assume, we have about 135 million houses today. 136 million. We will need another 136 million houses to accommodate this reduction in the number of people living in a household. We don't have the money, we don't have the land. We import that lifestyle. What will happen to the economy of India? Housing economy of India, financial economy of India. But this is not how economics is taught. This is what we have been fighting from 1990 with the Swadeshi Jagat. Your method of teaching economics itself has to change. Because you are teaching economics to a society which is collection of individuals. No, we are not a collection of individuals. We are a collection of communities. We are a collection of families. But we teach economics, the principles of economics, the macroeconomics is based on what is known as methodological individualism. Is there any economic student here? Any economic student? Because a student of economics must know what I am talking about, methodological individualism. Methodological individualism means that every individual can become a model, and on that model the world can be shaped. This is methodological individualism. Marketing economics, everything is founded on that. Actually, one girl did a research how it is not applicable in India. She is from IIT Kanpur, if I remember. I am from IIT Kanpur, I don't remember. I have the paper with me. She said in India, every buying decision is taken by the family, not by any individual. Whether we should buy a car or a refrigerator, or we should buy a house, we all sit together and decide. This year, no, we will postpone car for 2 more years. House is more important. This is not economics in the West. Everybody decides for himself. He will borrow money and buy a car. He will borrow more money and buy a house. You know, in America, 67% of the houses are on housing loans. $11 trillion is the housing loans. You know which is the place with the highest home owning population in the world? Anybody? It is India. 84% of Indians have a roof. Because 70% of them live in villages. Every person in the village has a roof over his head. The moment he shifts to the town, the first thing he loses is the house. And we want urbanization. Nothing wrong about urbanization. But is urbanization needed? After digital economics has come, you must have known about Sridhar Vembu. He came from America. In fact, I had a discussion with him. He came in 2011. He wanted that I should mentor him. I said, there is no use. If you are in America, how can I mentor you? He came here. We devised a business model. He is in software sector, and all software units are situated in metropolitan towns where the rental rates are higher, real estate prices are higher. I don't know why you need this when you have electronic highway connecting you to all the way to villages. Ramnath Goenka, who put up 25 floor building in Bombay, told me, dude, this 25 floor building commands value because it is in Nariman Point area. If it is put up in your village, will you have value? Will it have value? I said no, it won't have value. But a software company can put up a 25 floor building in Chennai. It will have very high real estate value. But if you can put up the same 25 floor building as 5 floor building in 10 or 15 tier 2, tier 3 cities, the cost will be 1/3, 1/4, 1/5. That is what makes Sridhar Vembu the most profitable, Zoho, the most profitable company in software. An alternative business model. All the software engineers come from rural areas into city. He has now opened software in different tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns. They come in scooter. You can go and see in his Tetkasi unit. 1200 people come. All come by scooter from nearby villages. You have to think differently. Their families are safe. They have their house there. Families are not disturbed. Parents are taken care of. This housing economy in India is surviving. It is working. Houses are working. It is only because of sharing space. And that is based on your culture. There is a sense of beauty. Our entire economy, lifestyle is based on beauties. The entire lifestyle, economy, approach is based on rights. in the West and particularly America. You know the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? All of you know it, no? Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is supposed to be the high tower of modernity, which H.G. Wells conceived and said every individual's right is sacrosanct. And in 1946, he drafted United Nations accepted in 1948. And now, human rights is the approach. Even against father, a child has human rights. Against husband, wife has human rights. Against wife, husband has human rights. Against neighbor, you have human rights. If the neighbor uses does bhajan in his house, that affects your rights. You can go to court. H.G. Wells sent this document to Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi said, you change the title from Universal Declaration of Human Rights to Universal Declaration of Human Duties, I will sign. Because duties have sustained our country, sustained families, they sustained communities. I'll tell you, one of my friends in 1994, he was driving out of his house to go to airport, and from there he was to go to Bombay to have a bank settlement talks. In those days, you could take the car to the airport and come back in the evening, come in the same car. That kind of small airport was Madras. When he was driving, his neighbors came and told me, my husband has a heart attack, please he has been taken to the hospital. He just drove the car into the house. Put her husband, took him to the hospital. His bank appointment went up in smoke. 7 years the man struggled. So I asked him, if you had not done that, Guru, if I had not done that and something had happened to that man, I would never live in peace in my life. You have a duty to your neighbor. This is India. This is lifestyle. This connects us. This is social security. And that is why for 6,68,000 villages and towns, tell me how many police stations we have. Any of you, stand up and tell me. We have 6,68,000 towns and villages in this country. This question I have asked in IIT here, in IIMs. Stand up and tell me how many police stations. You can even Google and see it. But anyway, I am asking it. You will not be so dishonest to answer the question through telephone. 14,800 police stations. And you look at the United Nations data of crimes. India is one of the countries with the lowest crime rates in the world. Whether it is murder, whether it is dacoity, whether it is rape. But this is not how we look at India. It is because we still have respect for elders, respect for teachers, respect for women. This sustains our society, not police. And this is not moral policing today. The real police is the corrupt police. Moral police is wrong police. Change the lifestyle. You will build 100,000 police stations. What will happen to your economy? So, whether it is food security, or housing economics, lifestyle is the biggest contributory to economic development and growth and sustainability, and also environmental sustainability. If India builds 150 million more houses, see the damage to environment. There is a study in European Union that when the number of persons came down from some 3.1 to 2.8 per household, how many more air conditioners were needed? How many more refrigerators were needed? What is the amount of CO2 gas emission because of that reduction? Please, in the way we look at the environment. I come to that. The third point is social security. In 1960, the Americans went on to a new paradigm. Because it is a disturbed society, children were not taking care of their parents. At least some, in 15-20% families, this was happening. Instead of making them also to take care of the families, the Americans proposed, politicians, that you need not have to take care of our families. You pay 12.5% tax, we will take care of the families. This is the origin of universal social security. And it was a baby boomers time. I don't know whether you heard about baby booming in America. That was the time when a lot of babies were born. Baby boomers. So a lot of people were getting into employment. More and more people were paying social security tax, and the social security account was in surplus. So many economists went to see how well we have done. But the population began coming down. In 2006, the number of, that is the amount of money coming into the social security account became less than the withdrawals from social security account because more people were outside employment, more people were retired than working. And the Americans have calculated, this was 2006. If you look into the social security account of America, you will get what I am telling you. The future social security burden reduced to the present day value is $72 trillion. 3 times the GDP of America. It's a time bomb ticking under America. Because nobody they have forgotten they have to take care of the parents. They have to take care of their brothers or sisters. When I addressed a meeting in IIM, in the management section of IIT here, about 10-12 years back, I asked them, how many of you are supported by your family to pursue higher education? Almost the entire audience lifted its hand. The same question I asked in America. I said, no Indian student should raise their hand because they are all supported by families. Others lifted their hand. Maybe 1 or 2 out of some 150. It is not the responsibility of the American parent to higher educate the child. In fact, after 16, if 16 or 17, if a son or a daughter is in the house, you are still in your house. You are still with your parents. That is the lifestyle that is coming to India through wokeism, through liberalism. Now in India, if all Indians, earning Indians, decide to disown their parents, 75 crore people will be standing before Narendra Modi's house for 2 square meals a day. There will be no India. There will be no economics. Tariff cannot save us. It is lifestyle. Import a wrong lifestyle, wrong thought, wrong morals, wrong way of life. There cannot be Atmanirbharta. Atmanirbharta is founded on lifestyle which is sustainable. Not only sustainable of human beings, sustainable of environment. Now I will come to why Trump, now I will come to what we understand as economics and growth. As I said, Trump began imposing duties. He came with what is known as the MAGA agenda, make America great again. Whether he can make America great again or whether anybody can make America great again, God knows. Because America is a top-down society. In 1878, America was established as a republic. It had a population of 7.8 billion. And till 1960, it had white, non-Hispanic white population of 87.5%. Till 1960. After they went on to this liberalization, globalization, immigration, Americans stopped working. They got coolies from outside to begin to work, whether it is home or factory or hotel. With the result, by 2000, I'm talking about from 1960 to 2000, the non-Hispanic white population came down to 72%. You know what is the non-Hispanic white population in America today? 58%. By 2050, America ceased to be a non-white country. That's the problem. He cannot mention it outside, but he thinks by speaking against immigration, he can communicate this point. So he is doing the easier thing first, to levy import duty, to reduce imports. But that problem is also going to hit America badly. Because America imported what is known as a deflation and exported inflation. They bought cheap goods and printed and exported dollars. All the dollar that we have, Reserve Bank has a dollar of almost $400 billion. Total foreign exchange reserves close to $700 billion. The world is saddled with $25 trillion of American money. And that money can buy America. It is easy to print. There was a time when dollar was equal to gold. It was even superior to gold. In 1990s and early 2003, 2008, when the dollar began to get into the receiving end. And now dollar, which was an admired currency, is now an enforced currency. Are you not going to use dollar? I will finish you. No country's currency should get into the position where the leader has to impose the dollar on other countries. It's a complete paradigm shift. From being an admired currency, dollar is now an enforced currency. So its future is big. So America has to do something. So he has decided to tax his people by raising the import duties. And he said, I am going to get billions of dollars. Yes, he is going to get billions of dollars. But that is the money he is raising from his own people. Whether it is sustainable, whether it will work in America, what kind of reaction it will be there, these are all for future to judge. But Trump has to do something, and so he is doing, whether it will succeed or not. Only history can say all economies have shut their mouth. In America, economies have started. They have stopped talking, and they don't know whether to support or oppose this man. All economic institutions are dead silent today. But that provides the greatest opportunity for us. That's what the Prime Minister is speaking. The greatest enemy of India is who? He asked the audience. It's a dependence on outside. First, dependence on outside for ideas, dependence on outside for lifestyle, and finally, dependence on outside for material things. All these three are interlinked, and I would like you to think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful and inspiring address. Drawing wisdom from our past while envisioning 2047, let us carry forward the resolve to shape a prosperous, independent, and resilient India. This is a resolution for all of us, and it was a pleasure listening to you. The floor is now open for question and answer sessions. Can anyone please hand over the mics?
Speech mode. Okay. Hello. My name is Sudarshan. I'm from So my name is Sudarshan. I'm from IIT Hyderabad, Department of Climate Change, and I'm a PhD student. So I wanted to ask you a question because a lot of states in India are competing for GCC centers, so global capability centers, and there's also a lot of pride in having a GCC center in their own state or city. But at the end of the day, our Indian tech talent from our IITs is working for a foreign company to establish R&D for these foreign companies. And the question which I had to use, what is your view on it? Because actually we are kind of renting our talent out to foreign companies, whereas China, for example, is investing heavily in their own local big giants and tech brands. And so I just wanted to ask your view on that.
To understand what is going to happen in the technology field, we have to go to the period prior to the WTO. Prior to the WTO, technology agreements were entered into with companies, and anyone could buy anybody's technology. And there was no technology regime, there was no global patent. You had to patent in each country your technology. So this was made easy by the WTO by saying one single patent for the whole world. If it is given patent in one place, it can be filed in another place, and that under the WTO agreement, that patent will be binding on other patents. In the WTO very nearly collapsing, I see this patent regime itself collapsing. I remember sometime in 1996 or 97, there was an article in Foreign Affairs magazine about Japanese speaking about Thai people. He said, Thai people think the technology will fall from heaven. You have to go out and steal it. That is what China did. This is going to be a mad world. And there will be huge amount of briberies. People will shift, ideas will shift. Patents will be bribed and taken. So the present patent regime on the basis of which the GCCs are founded, I don't know what will happen to the GCC maybe 5 years later. It depends upon, you see, this world is going to be dominated by nationalists and nationalist industries. These are the two groups which will dominate the world. And if, of course, our industry is also quite strong because they were first think we are no country, but I am one of those very close to many corporates. I advise them also. So they are all very confident. Come home about India. I have never seen this kind of confidence about India among industrials. It has not percolated down to educational institutions. It's a sad thing because we are still governed by the colonial and post-colonial hangover. We just don't produce confident children. We don't produce confident students. You must all God see that when we have a discussion. It's coming tomorrow. To ask him about what an Indian student, Indian youth is. He will tell you. Yes, he has actually worked. And what is his target? 10 to 15 years from now, he must beat Microsoft. He must have the ambition. And he is working for it. And he is trying to create a universal computer language from Pali. He devotes 8 hours for that. Now I am telling you something because it's something which I think I spoke in Bombay. How many of us know the Schrodinger, Heisenberg, and Josephson? These are the names of Nobel Prize winners. You know what they have said? How the universe originated is a question that is tormenting the scientists today. The Newtonian science which we see, this whole world, this whole you and me, these are all only appearances. We are all collections and movement of atom in a regular manner that is the shape of the world, planets. The entire creation is ultimately a collection of man. It's a collection of atoms. So where did the atom come from? Newton said you have to move faster than light backwards to find out how the atom came about. But Stephen Hawking pursued this. And he said 1/1,000,000th of an atom. You can understand what is an atom. 1/1,000,000th of an atom developed such speed, such heat, it exploded. And that produced several trillion megatons of atomic energy. And that is what is expanding into the whole universe which you see. And where did that 1/1,000,000th of an atom come from? Stephen Hawking said, don't ask, but it was not created by God. This is what he said. Now, a lot of researchers are going on. In 1960, Schrödinger said that everything came from one indivisible consciousness called Brahman, which is explained in the Vedas. Is it the way you look at Vedas? This is what Heisenberg said. If it is known to 1,000 science students, one may have an idea of finding out what is that in Vedas. You don't read it. Vedas is sound. It is Sanskrit. You know nothing about it. It is so near us and yet so far because there is a psychological divide, linguistic divide, cultural divide between us and the source of knowledge. And the most important thing is Roger Penrose, who said a pre-existing universal consciousness resulted in atom, that is matter and energy. Of course, for that he didn't get the Nobel Prize. He got the Nobel Prize in 2020. He is one of the persons who is doing research on how the consciousness called Brahman resulted in Big Bang. I have not come across many science students even knowing about it. So if you want to know the future of science, you got to move away from the Newtonian model. We are working only on Newtonian model. So GCCs and all that will come and go. My view is, are we rooted in a different way of thinking? In fact, I have advised compounding, and he said we put up all this in the form of some codings and presentations so that our IIT students come to know that this is the way quantum scientists are talking about our Vedas and Upanishads. My feeling is that we have to think a little differently from the world today because the world itself does not know where it is heading to. That's what it is.
Good evening, sir. I'm Sri Jayanti from IIT Madras. Very inspiring speech as a group and as an individual also today, sir. So, with respect to 5GI, indigenously developed 5G technology by our Director Thomas played a significant role. I consider that as a bold statement from India to the world that we are not importing Western models, we are creating our own technology for our own people, for our own geography with our own local tech. So, would you also consider that technology can be a new frontier to reclaim and start thinking in Indian way rather than importing Western models?
100%. See, we have to compete with every country in the world. And for that, the most important thing needed is the self-confidence. What our students, our faculty, our scientists, just as our economists and policy makers are, they don't have the self-confidence. I want you guys develop the self-confidence in Mahatma Gandhi. And I cannot forget when he went to the Round Table Conference. He was asked, he was called half naked Fakir. So he was asked, you are dressed so missing. He said, your king is wearing all the dress that me and others wear. He is wearing 10 times the dress. At that time, when the country was a slave country, he spoke so forthrightly. We are a different country today, and I will take you to what Swami Vivekananda, when he traveled from Calcutta by foot, in that period, there were 30 large famines in the country. Lakhs of people died upon that. Of course, the reason is the British rule. But when he went to America, he went from America to America and spoke this country is going to show where to run. We need that kind of confidence and faith in this country. And you have to become part of the vision and the imagination of this country. Vision of this country. You are not here only as an individual. Yes, you are here as an individual. You have to work for the family. But you have to work for a higher cause. If 1% of Indian students get fired up like this, you will see a very different India. You will go and steal knowledge. Knowledge is not given, it is stolen. Do we know that? So we must have the guts. And I think the way the country is rising, now I feel that more and more people are fired with this confidence. And I hope that it will infect the technocrats also.
Good evening, sir. So my name is Rishika Pandey from NIT Puducherry. Thank you, sir, for your great and kind words. As you taught us such a great topics that make lot of impact on our cultures and lifestyle. So my question is, I know that you wrote Tughlaq. As being as editor or writer, what idealistic thoughts came to your mind when you were writing the magazine? And can you share your views for that?
See, I have written about it also. In my life, I never took a decision about myself. The decisions were already taken. For example, I never wanted to become a journalist. So, Mr. Ramnath Goenka said, you have to investigate this rascal, he is ruining the economy, and he asked me to investigate about Ambani. So, as a chartered accountant, I have my flash for investigating. Any Ambani, sorry. Anyway, he was the biggest. I thought, I don't fight less than 8. So, I made 4 volumes and we briefed 20 journalists. Nobody was willing to write on the subject. It's a boring subject. Who will bother about it? Nobody will be interested in it. Then Goenka told me to only you have to turn a journalist. Chartered accountants always used to write 20-page documents. They don't know how to write 2-page articles. Then he gave me a group of